Welcome to Food for Thought today. We are honored to have Rabbi Jeremy Fine join us. He is the senior rabbi at Temple Aaron of St. Paul, Minnesota. He's a graduate of the Jewish Theological Seminary. He has completed certificates in fundraising from New York University and a mini MBA for nonprofit organizations from St. Thomas University. Throughout 2014, Rabbi Fine garnered national attention for being named one of the Forward magazine's most inspiring rabbis in America. Later, he was selected to deliver an LE talk entitled Realigning the Synagogue Playbook. Besides being a pulpit rabbi, Rabbi Fine is the creator of thegreatrambino.com, a popular sports site, as well as host of the Religion of Human Nature podcast and the YouTube show Enjoyably Jewish with his two daughters. So welcome, Rabbi Fine, to Savannah.
Thanks, Jamie. I don't actually think I've ever been to Savannah. I've been to Atlanta a couple times, most recently at the United Synagogue Biennial. And I just mentioned earlier, Bruce and Natalie were my congregants in Amsterdam, New York, which was the reason I'm a pulpit rabbi. And I say that all the time. I would never have been a pulpit rabbi had it not been for my experience in Amsterdam. I always wanted to do education. And I have fallen into this trap of being a sports rabbi. And I'll just tell you the story real quickly. So it's the great Rabbino, as in like Bambino, but rabbi, for those of you who are baseball fans. Babe Ruth used to be called the great Bambino. So my cousin thought it'd be funny if I was the great Rabbino. And it basically started, I don't know how many of you have had this experience, but we were planning our wedding, my wife and I, and by we, I mean she. And I had very little to do that summer. So my friends were like, you should start a blog. So I did. And then one morning I woke up and there were like 12,000 hits on my site. And because anyone during the Super Bowl who Googled, is Julian Edelman Jewish, happened to have landed on my website. And it just took off from there. Really, it was a happenstance. And I've been able to do some really cool things. I got press credentials at the Super Bowl and at the Final Four. And I basically interview and write stories and top 10 lists of anything Jewish in sports. And I speak and talk about these things. The topic we're going to talk about today is I'm a big believer that you can tell what's happening in the Jewish world by looking at the microcosm of sports and how they're treating Jews. And I will show you why I've come to that conclusion. I have taught this class to kids, to adults, to anywhere in between. Please use the chat or raise your hand to ask questions. This should be as interactive as possible. I'm going to call on people, or if you can, read. And I have a whole slide presentation to show you. So I'm going to share my screen real quickly. Okay. So, there we go. Okay, so these are just some pictures. So I'm calling this Jewish Sports and Modern Society. Part of my passion for this actually came when I was in college. I took a class called Sport and Modern Society. It had nothing to do about Jews. And we learned this very idea, like what's going on in the sports world very much is a microcosm. We talked about mascots, namings. We talked about Title IX and women in sports and how we can sort of see what's going on. These are just some pictures. I did the opening blessing at the new US Bank Stadium, which was one of the coolest experiences of my lifetime. My wife decided not to come with me, so I took a congregant. And little did I know that the guest entertainer, and we were front row, was Jennifer Hudson. I don't know how many of you know her, but she's a very, very famous singer and an amazing singer. So I took a picture of my wife. I was like, remember, you chose not to come to this. You have the invitation. Just so you know, I'm sitting front row for Jennifer Hudson, and she's basically serenading me. So it was an amazing experience. And then there were just tons and tons of football players there. This is another picture of something we did in the Jewish community where Omri Caspi, who's the first Israeli to play in the NBA, was playing for the Timberwolves for a short time, and we had a Jewish sports night. And the other is a conversation with Julie Heldman. This is something we've started at our congregation. These talks, it's called the Glass Ceiling Talks. That we only did one. Number 2 was supposed to be this year, and it's not going to happen. So because of COVID, but they're sort of book talks, sit down talks outside in the community. Any questions before I begin? David, do you feel good over there? Okay, Bubba, you got the Hanukkah beer? All right, so I'm just gonna begin the first slide. So I'll read the first one. It's a little bit long, but how many, raise your hand if you had heard of Tal Brody. Okay, we got a few hands. So I'm just gonna, Tal is a sort of a larger than life Jewish personality. He's become an ambassador to Israel. But before that, in 1966, Tal Brody was drafted into the NBA, and out of the University of Illinois, also happens to be my alma mater, although I was not drafted to the NBA. And he decided to go over and play in Israel because there were a few players in front of him. So he thought he'd go and get some experience playing internationally and then come back, which he never did. He stayed in Israel. And here's what happened. This indeed was a wonderful honor, and I feel very proud to accept it. To see before my eyes what was happening to the country because of our success in the basketball, not only in 1977, when we won our first European championship, but also again in 1981, 2001, 2004, 2005, and as well as the 12 times in the finals of Europe. To be a part of this historical ride and to see all that I've seen in my 44 years in Israel is a lifetime memorable gift, and now to be inducted into the Jewish Sports Hall of Fame makes us eternal. Brody's goal was to take Israeli basketball team of Maccabi Tel Aviv to another level, and by doing so, raise the spirits and morale of the country as a whole. This is what happened as our team not only passed the first round of the European Championships, but also all the way to the finals. So let's talk about 1966. That's when he went over. What's going on in Israel in 1966? Everyone's muted, so it's okay if you want to unmute yourself. I'm okay with that, Jamie.
There's a war.
Very good. Thank you, David. There's a war. Israel's what? How many years old?
48
to 66 is what, 18 years old?
Still a baby, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right. So it's not even drinking age yet. So, well, actually in Israel, it had just turned drinking age. So, there's so much infancy. And what does Israel do? They get this guy, Tal Brody, who's an NBA player, and he comes in and he revives the country through sports. We take this actually for granted. Israeli basketball is one of the first things that allowed Israel to feel like a part of, for a better, lack of a better way to look at it, Europe. Okay, in modern society, sports were booming. I mean, you had great players, and it was starting to be on TV and things like that, right? So you had all of these things going on, and Israel was going to grow this way. Okay, this is in 1966 or 71 when they first won. Okay, we're going to move to the next slide. Okay, Israel, 2004. And this is Gal Friedman. He is a parasailer, which is what I was going to do if I didn't become a rabbi. Not true. That was a lie. Okay, who would like to read?
10 days before the race, I felt the stress of the whole country wanting the gold. I was already in good position and expectations rose, mainly towards the final race. My friends told me that in the cafes, the malls and everywhere in Israel, the televisions were turned in the Olympics, everyone wanting to see the race live. They told me that everyone was watching. I knew that this was Israel, and this was what history wanted. I managed to channel all my energies and I got positive results.
Great. So what happened? What is he kissing there in the picture?
Gold medal.
He's the first gold medal winner, 2004. How many of you were alive? All right, good. So, so we have from this time, sports are developing in Israel. They had developed now into an international level, Europe, and by 2004, which was, let's see, let's do the math, 56 years, they have their first gold medalist. That's pretty good. I mean, people had placed and done well, but they had not gotten gold until then. I think they have like 5 now around there. But they do. You'll see Israelis in judo. You'll see Israelis in, oddly, sailing, because we don't have like tons of waves that but we have them. Tennis, Israelis are really becoming great in tennis, and now you're seeing them slowly in other sports. But 2004, we get our first gold medal, okay? Pride of the country. They were ecstatic. All right, we're going to go to the next slide, okay? So we're only discussing Israel right now. I should have said this at the beginning. Israel, America, and then we're going to talk about the world, okay? So what's going on in Israel, what's going on in America, and then we're going to talk about what's going on in the world. So we're still in Israel. This is Omri Kaspi, 2010. We mentioned him previously. Who would like to read here? Short paragraph about Omri Kaspi. Anyone but David.
I'll read.
I'll read.
All right.
I'll read.
All
As soon
right.
as I was drafted into the NBA, the team called me and I decided adopting number 18 was a good symbolic thing to do for my country, Caspi said. I will have a lot of years with the number 18. I try to focus on the game, but I recognize that being the first native Israeli NBA player comes with responsibility, he said.
Okay, thank you. So Omri Kaspi is not the first draft in the NBA. We know Tal Brody. Well, he was not, now he's Israeli technically, but it wasn't at the time. There were other players who had been drafted into the NBA, but he was the first who played in the NBA, drafted in the first round. Since then, Gal Mekel played in the NBA for a few years. TJ Leaf currently in the NBA, although he's not Jewish. That's a really great story. TJ Leaf's father went overseas to Israel to play basketball. Plays for the Pacers right now in Indianapolis, and but grew up in Israel for the first several years of his life and has Israeli passport and everything. But he's not Jewish because his father went over there. We'll talk about that in a second. And here, Omri Kaspi goes. He played 10 years in the NBA. He just retired last year from the NBA in Israel, and there couldn't have been a better role model and representation from Israel. Not only did his game speak for itself, but he's a mensch. He's come back to Israel and really been a celebrity in a very positive manner. He's taken players from the United States over to Israel, which I can't stress how important that is, because one little article from these athletes rings far greater than any tweet that I'm going to send out as a rabbi. Okay. And he's taken, I think, 2 or 3 sort of NBA missions. And in about a week, the highest Israeli talent ever will be drafted, probably number 4 or as low as 7 in the NBA. Denny, and I'm not going to pronounce his last name right, Abadia. He is a star. Will be following in Omri's footsteps. And they're very, very close. So, and other Israelis are coming in. So one of the scouts from, we've had a coach for the Cavaliers and now someone in the front office there. And Israelis are now making an impact and coming over and being a part of the NBA. And we know Jews have made an impact in the NBA. The first basket ever scored in the NBA was by Ossie Sheckman, Jewish guy. David Stern and Adam Silver, the last 2 commissioners of the NBA, were Jewish. So a lot of Jewish influence in the NBA. But
Max Zaslavsky.
Who?
Max Zaslavsky.
Max Zaslavsky, yep. So David, a little known fact, I have a rookie, except for one baseball player, I have a rookie card from every player from every sport. That's one of my hobbies. So I have a Max Zaslavsky rookie card. I don't have it on me. It's at my house, but that's one of my hobbies. So Omri has had a major impact on Israel and vice versa. So not just because of Tal Brody, but many NBA or NBA quality players will go over and hone their skills in Israel, males and females. Why do they do this? The lifestyle in Israel is great. They speak English. They love the food. Plenty of them find their spouse there because they're fun, and they don't take anything too seriously culturally, where in many other countries they do. So the guys can go over there, they can play basketball, they can hang out on the beach during their free time and have the best food in the world. So that's major. So now we've seen a progress from the beginning of the infancy of Israel to a gold medal. 6 years later, we see the first NBA player, and now it's becoming more of a regularity. Okay, and we're going to go to this last part. This is 2010, same year, or maybe a little later. This is a story from Tamar Katz, who I interviewed many years ago. I'll read this one. I qualified for the Winter Olympics to represent Israel, and we had 3 spots in the Winter Olympics. I was the first person to represent Israel in figure skating, but my spot was taken away by Israel. Israel has a rule that you must place within the top 12 in the European Championships. During the European Championships, I had a viral infection. I shouldn't have competed, but I did anyway because it was my dream to represent my country. Unfortunately, I finished 21st. But in September 2009, I qualified for the Olympics in Melbourne at the Melbourne Trophy Olympic qualifying competition. There I finished 7th. Israel has said several times that they do not want to send tourists to the Olympic Games. They want to send people who bring back medals. Okay, so now we know 1966, Tal Brody puts sports on the map. We're starting to influx real players into sports society. Tamar doesn't get to go. Her last comment is because Israel doesn't want to just send people who are going to go and have a good time. They want to spend people who are going to do what?
Win, compete.
Win. We went from playing to winning. If that doesn't tell you a little bit more about Israel, I don't know what other stories will, right? We went from the infancy of the infrastructure of Israel and building the ground and agriculture. And now actually Israel is very worried that this generation of young Israelis won't work the land. Why? What are they doing nowadays? They're in what?
Tech.
Very good. Tech, startup. If they're on the agriculture side, it's not working the land. It's through machines or things like that, right? You have SodaStream and you have all sorts of things. Israel isn't satisfied anymore with just being the little country that could. Israel wants to be amongst the nations. It wants to be a leader, and it knows that if it fails, what do people start doing? What happens to the morale of a country if you lose all the time?
They leave.
Yeah. Americans know a little bit about that now, right? It feels like we're always losing. So they want to keep the morale up and the international profile up. And to do that, you have to win. Did it sink for Tamar? Absolutely it did. She would not have won. She had the chance. I mean, you all know the story of the U.S. hockey team, right? It's a Minnesota story, really. But that was that miracle was not going to happen here. Even here she's saying she qualified where she finished 7th. 7th doesn't medal, and that wasn't against the best. That was just to qualify, right? So this I think says everything about Israeli culture and society. They want, when they're going to be on an international level, or when they're going to be represented on a large scale, they want to be viewed favorably, and they want to be viewed as winners. So you'll see judo, we excel. All right, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Any thoughts, questions? Anyone totally disagree with my hypothesis? No? All right, Bubba, how many beers in are you?
No, this is just a 4-pack. It would waste my time. So,
Okay. I love your accent.
yes, sir.
I don't have nearly that kind of. All right, we're going to move to America. Everyone okay with that?
Baby.
So this is a young man you might have heard of named Sandy Koufax. Raise your hand if you've heard of Sandy Koufax.
Oh, of course.
Okay, hold on. Maybe we'll have Sandy join us, okay? Sandy will be right here with us. Okay, so who'd like to read? It can't be the Hirsches.
Thanks.
Well, you guys did a great job. You set the bar high like Israel.
Okay.
Got it.
All right, Bubba, go ahead.
You know, Sandy, in my lifetime, there's 3 guys I've known who have transcended their sports and become a symbol for their race and nationality. Jackie with the blacks, Joe
That's
D.
Jackie Robinson and Joe
Right.
DiMaggio.
Joe DiMaggio with the Italians, and you with the Jews. I know it. Koufax refused to be a Jew or a Gentile Jew. He may have been different, but he refused to be anything other than himself. In the Talmud, it is written that some attain eternal life with a single act. On Yom Kippur, 57:26, a baseball immortal became a Jewish icon.
Okay. So there could have been a lot of moments in Jewish sports history in America that I chose. Ossie Sheckman, which we talked about. Hank Greenberg, who was another great baseball player. Dolph Shays in basketball. This is what I wanted to choose because I think it's a story all of us know.
What is it?
5. Sandy Koufax was pitched game 1 of the World Series. This is from a book called The Lefty's Legacy, which is on my shelf somewhere. And he decides to sit out. Pitches game 2. Do you know what city that the World Series took place in?
Yeah.
I'll give you a hint. One of us is sitting in that city right now.
Okay, I guess. Minneapolis.
St. Paul.
St. Paul, right. It was, he stayed at the St. Paul Hotel, which is not too far from me, been there. I wrote a whole story, if you guys ever Google the Koufax Midrash, about what happened. So it's believed that he was here on Yom Kippur, although I have no proof of that. The rabbi of old, who's Alav Shalom, passed away many years ago, claimed that he was here, and I did some investigative work. And only Sandy knows. But he did wrap tefillin. I know that while he was in town for the World Series. Rabbi Feller, older rabbis in the community, went and wrapped tefillin with him. The key phrase here is Sandy's refused to be a Jew's Jew or a Gentile's Jew. And what he meant by that is Sandy wasn't a religious man. Never has been. What is happening in 1965? All Jews take off for Yom Kippur unless you've completely assimilated out of the religion. It wasn't a question whether you were going to work or not. I'm sure most of you or many of you looking around the room can attest to that, right? To tell my grandparents they were going to miss Yom Kippur, the synagogue would have had to been on fire. And even then, they probably would have just gone to a different synagogue. They would have never missed it. My parents as well. My parents' generation doesn't even dawn, at least my parents who were raised by those types. So, but Sandy wasn't that way. This is certainly he's a very introverted human being. He's one of the only athletes I have never spoken with, although he has signed a picture for me, which hangs in my man cave, which is just the corner of my basement. But so he didn't do this knowing that what it would lead to in Jewish lore. He did this because that's what you do. And I'm assuming I'm an old soul. Okay, I was definitely born in the wrong generation. There's no doubt about that. Anyone who knows me, that's why my older congregants take to me. My younger, that's a different story. And so when I look at this, I understand it, because of course you just go to shul, and I'm sure a lot of us are dealing with our kids, whether they want to go or not. We have to remind them that it was never said. We watch. How many of you watch Mrs. Maisel? Many of you aren't, right? So they all go to shul. Do they argue in shul? Of course they argue in shul. They want the rabbi to be there. We got the rabbi, right? We had Rachel Brosnahan and Kevin Pollack at the synagogue a couple of years ago, and I've stayed friendly with Kevin Pollack, and they, that's the story. They all did it. It just was what you did, right, as a family. And today it's a little different. So that's what's going on in America in 1965. We're going to fast forward pretty far off to 2009, and we're going to talk about Jason Markey. Okay, who would like to read this? Anyone? Can't be the Hirsches, can't be Bubba.
I'll read.
All right, go ahead.
The basement dwelling 2010 Washington Nationals are no 1965 Dodgers, and Nats pitcher Jason Markey, who is Jewish, is certainly no Koufax. But Markey is slated to start Friday night Kol Nidre at the Philadelphia Phillies. He plans on doing so. In fact, he has in past years too. Your team expects you to do your job and not let your teammates down. And that's the approach I take, he said.
Thank you. Okay, there's Jason Markey. We'll talk about him in a little bit. Jason Markey was coming off an injury. His team was not going to make the playoffs. Pitching was irrelevant. And he actually grew up probably more religious than Sandy Koufax. But in 2009, he pitches in a meaningless game in a meaningless moment. 1965, the less religious Sandy Koufax takes off Yom Kippur. Now, some do. Sean Green has taken off Yom Kippur. Ryan Lavarnway, I think last year took off Yom Kippur, and players have. But this was a statement. What's the difference between the Jewish world in America in 1965 versus 2009?
Israel was established a lot more than they were back in 65 or 55.
Okay, so what does Israel established have to do with it? So we have a comfort level, we're more accepted into the world. We can be Americanized more because those who want to just be Jewish, in theory, could move to Israel. That's problematic for me as a rabbi, but that's the difference. I'm a huge Zionist. I can't work in Israel. So what else is what's going on in America? What else is going on in America that's different?
And when?
60s, we're married.
Vietnam.
There's much more assimilation.
Right, Janet. So much more assimilation, right? Just think about yourselves and where your children are, or your grandchildren.
In 1965, Vietnam.
Yeah, Vietnam. What does that have to do with 2009? You're saying because there was a war, we
Oh,
want.
I thought you said, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's
I
okay.
thought you,
No, I mean, there
Also,
could be.
by 2009, a lot of Jews were already supporting more of the Palestinian cause, where in 65, there was no such thing.
Yeah, I don't think that's possible. I think that there's I don't think this has to do with Israel so much. I don't think Sandy Koufax or Jason Markey made these decisions having anything to do with Israel. The security that Israel gave us certainly helped spawn assimilation. I can hear that argument. But we're more secularized. We're more Americanized. Many people see themselves as American first and second. And I would say that
I also think it might have been because that he didn't think he wasn't the type pitcher that Sandy Koufax was. He wasn't the star, and as competitive as Major League Baseball is, he probably wanted to just make sure he kept his job for next year because he's still probably then making a lot of money, and didn't want to lose a contract or be thought of negatively by his teammates.
Yeah. So Bubba, the second part of what you said, absolutely, is where he doesn't, he says that he didn't want to take a day off. I don't think he would have lost his job because of missing one game, because he would just pitch the next day. So he wouldn't, it's not like he'd miss, too much. And they weren't going to make the playoffs, so it wouldn't matter. But certainly he doesn't want to be seen as Jewish. He doesn't want the paper to write about it. He doesn't want it to overshadow his, whether it's teamwork or teammates. or it just doesn't simply mean as much to him.
Well, he would not be making the same statement as a Sandy Koufax.
Pitchers it's more noticeable in pitchers because they actually are slated to start as opposed to hitters who are just play every day. So when you take off one day, it's not so noticeable. But for pitchers, it is because you're only supposed to pitch every 5th day. That's why I used an example of a pitcher as opposed to another player.
But Sandy Koufax was a star. I've never even heard of this guy.
Well, you should have. He was a star, just not the best star. He wasn't the brightest star. Right? And we're going to come back to Jason Marquis because something happened a couple of years ago that really sort of transforms all of what we're talking about. So we're going to move one more slide.
Wait, before we go on, this
Sure.
is Carol. Hi. I'm
Hi,
having
Carol.
some trouble with my computer. Before we go on, in 2009, there was an increase, a stark increase in anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic acts, because there was a Gaza incursion around that time. Did public opinion of Jews have anything to do with his decision, or really that was just his own personality?
Yeah, I don't think Israel has anything to do with Jason Marquis' decision in 2009. Jason Marquis, knowing a little bit about him, the decision is fully because he is a Jew. Jason Marquis had a bar mitzvah. He grew up going to synagogue. He chose not to pay because baseball was more important to him than Yom Kippur.
Okay.
However, that could change. Well, Jason Marquis just retired recently, or is not pitching anymore. But something happens in 2017. This is an interview I did with on my website with Angela Rain, who was one of the pitching coaches. For those of you, this is just an aside. I happen to be like the rabbi for Team Israel baseball. That's not an official title, but I write most of the Aliyah letters. I've done fundraisers for them. I work with the team pretty closely with media. So, and I become pretty close to some of the guys. So Andrew was the pitching coach. He was a former Major League Baseball player. And this is what he writes. Does someone want to read this? A little longer of a paragraph.
I'll read it.
All right, thanks, Bruce.
How did you get to coach for Team Israel, and what was that experience like? Got involved with Peter Kurtz, the president of IAB, and then Brad called me and got involved that year, and then stayed with the team 4 years later. The experience was incredible. I can't even describe it. Seeing the kids and how tight-knit they were. It began with the club being close in Jupiter in 2012. It was such a letdown. And to see them come back and the leadership they took, I thought it would be tougher to bond them together again, but they are even closer. As far as representing Israel, with Israel across my chest, that was a dream for me as a kid. I felt tremendous pride. There was nothing like that when I was playing. I could imagine how those kids feel to be on the field. Great feedback from people all over the world. Japanese fans wearing Israeli stuff. Great people, selfless. We want to get Israel back in the WBC in 4 years. We are really proud of what we accomplished.
Okay, sorry. This was before the Olympic run, which, so that you know, they were supposed to be this summer. Now it's going to be next summer. Israel is being represented in baseball for the Olympics. I'm assuming most of you have not heard of the Israeli Baseball League because it doesn't exist. It existed for one summer. But a lot of Americans have gone over, made Aliyah, and now represent. Actually, this year, one of those players, Ryan LaBarnway, was the first technically Israeli to ever play in the major leagues because he played this year for the Marlins. And the first Israeli who was born with an Israeli passport pitched in the major leagues. So baseball is slowly growing in Israel, and it's certainly growing internationally. This is a game changer, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this at the end of the session. This is a game changer in America because young Jews are seeing themselves represented on a baseball field again. And they're doing it as a chevra, as a group, as a community. Now, which is what the Judaism is today. Doesn't matter if you're, in Savannah, Georgia, or Atlanta, Georgia, or St. Paul, Minnesota, or New York City. Community in the Jewish world is king. It's very, very hard to practice on your own. Family was king in 1965. And in 2009, we were sort of going through a little bit of like, what is the Jewish community? How do we connect together? By 2000, and I don't mean that for everyone, but as Janet, you mentioned assimilation was up. In 2007, 2017, just 10 years later, you can have assimilated and still be prideful and Jewish. In 2009, a lot of people thought that it was either or. I had to be American or Jewish. And in today, we very much know, because of the rise of anti-Semitism, absolutely. Because of, I would say rabbis have had a major impact in this, specifically conservative rabbis who have showed a way to be traditionally Jewish and totally Americanized. Reformed rabbis have been doing that for a long time, but now it gave another denomination, and even some Orthodox rabbis as well. And what they're doing, all the players that I've talked to have all embraced this. And many of them had left. Judaism was totally not a part of their lives. Maybe it was part of their parents' lives, or they did Hanukkah, or they did a Seder, maybe. But now they met players who did it all. They met, and many of them are now re-embracing their Judaism. And because of that, you will see, certainly in the next 10 years, I believe, far more Jewish athletes and Jewish voices speak up on behalf of American Jews and Israel. They're all coming back positive Zionists. Okay, so that's America. And I think what's going on in America is we've learned that, yes, we assimilated, but now we're coming back to tradition a little bit. Any questions, thoughts? All right, we're gonna move ahead to Europe, which is the most controversial. We're not gonna read this one because it's long, but how many people know the story of what happened in the 72 Olympics in Munich? Okay, so I'll just tell you that Israel sent a team over there, a team of a representation, and there was I believe it's called Black's what's it? I'm forgetting. It's something.
Black September.
Black September.
Yeah, Black September. Thank you. There we go. Black September, and a Palestinian group held them hostage and eventually murdered all of them in Munich.
Yeah.
The games went on pause for a brief moment, but the Olympic Committee chose to continue, even though there was a mass murder, and I'm using mass. I think there were 9 of them.
11.
11. Thank you. I think 9 from one sport and then 2 maybe others.
Yeah, there were 11 altogether.
Yeah. So, and there were some players that left in protest internationally. Here, I use this. Josh Herman said, if you give a party and someone is killed at the party, you don't continue the party. I'm going home. And others did too. But this is 1972. Again, all of you were, or most, maybe not Jamie, were alive. And I wasn't, but this was a horrifying moment in the world history. Okay, we're going to flash forward just to 2012. Who would like to read this? This is about Shachar Pierre, who was a fabulous female tennis player who recently, I believe, retired. I think she just had her 2nd kid, so I don't believe she's going to be coming back anytime soon. May move back to Israel, but was playing on the international circuit. Who would like to read this?
I'm happy to read.
Oh, I thank you.
All right. Organizers of a women's tennis tournament said Tuesday that security fears were behind the decision to bar an Israeli player. The snub brought swift denunciations from the Women's Tennis Association and warnings that it could consider scratching the Barclays Dubai tournament from its calendar. The Tennis Channel announced it would not televise the tournament this week in protest of the United Arab Emirates' last-minute visa denial for Israeli player Shahar Pierre.
Okay. there's an international tournament that bars one of the top tennis players because she is Israeli. 1972, these individuals were murdered. 2010, they're barred from tournament play. What does that tell you about the world and how it views Jews or Israel?
The whole world is anti-Semitic.
Hadn't changed much. There's still people out there.
Exactly. Not so much has changed. They were murdered at the Olympics, and they still believe and put that anger or their misconceptions or their demonization on Jews, and maybe it's just and Israel.
Could this happen now with the new peace accords?
It's a great question. I believe that will be far more welcoming.
Because, I mean, do we know if this is something like this is specifically addressed within the parameters of what each country gives to the other?
Yeah, it's not, but they wouldn't. The question will be, but it's not always in Dubai, meaning.
No, I realize that, but this particular instance.
Yeah, I would say that actually now Israelis will be welcome to play in this tournament.
And that they would take the security risks and protections and not punish the intended target rather than the intended perpetrators.
It will be interesting to note, even a few years ago, I'm a big wrestling fan, and even a few years ago, for those of you who follow wrestling at all, Bill Goldberg, who won a championship in Saudi Arabia. So it is true. I mean, say what you want about politics, and I'm going to leave all that behind, but Bibi always has been saying for maybe 10, 12 years, the Arab world is going to come around to peace because Israel has much to offer and we're not the enemy. Iran is the enemy, and they know that. So, and this is more of a slight on John Kerry than it is Barack Obama, but John Kerry said, and this was in my high holiday sermon, it will never happen. No Arab countries will ever make peace with Israel until it makes peace with the Palestinians. And Bibi, and apparently Jerry Kushner, believed that to be very untrue. And for all of the Mishigas, John Kerry was dead wrong, because obviously it's not only happening, but it's happening quicker and better than it's ever happened before. Mm-hmm. So that's to know. And we're going to go to one last piece. Yes, that's this. Yeah, this is me at APAC Policy Convention with Or Sasson, who in 2016, just 6 years later, was I believe he ended up winning the bronze medal at the World Championships, but was in the Final Four when this happened. So I'm going to read this for time's sake. The Israeli, a two-time European silver medalist, brushed off the unpleasant encounter with his defeated Egyptian opponent, Islam El-Shaabi. El-Shaabi refused to shake hands with Sasson after his defeat and even bowed to a mutual respect. The Egyptian was ordered back to the floor to bow and was booed by the crowd and later said he was quitting judo. So what I will tell you about this man in Egypt, a place we have pretty civil relationships with, he feared for his life. And this happens very, very often, specifically in judo, because in judo, if anyone knows anything about karate, a mutual sign of respect at the end is to bow and to shake hands or sometimes hug or whatever. It's always, unlike other sports where people can be sort of nasty, that is not karate, because you're specifically supposed to hurt or defeat your opponent in a physical manner. And this was the international news. And it's not the first, it was not the only time it's happened. It happens frequently. Orr's story went international because he had won and had a shot at the gold, and Europe and Egypt has a relatively diplomatic. Likely, this man, El-Shaabi's life was threatened and was probably told, if you go up against an Israeli and either whether he beats you or doesn't, you shake his hand, we will kill you and you come home. And it goes to show you that the world, even some of our allies, aren't fully there. And I don't think it's just Israel. I think it's Jews, but it's certainly Israel. So we looked at Israel, where they want to hold this high standard. We look at America, and high standard for anything they do. We looked at America through sport, where there's assimilation, but maybe they're slowly coming back to some tradition. Look at the world, which still hasn't fully accepted Jews and Israelis. So the last part of this is just to talk about, there's one more slide, but we're going to just focus on this. This is a question I asked Ryan Labarne. What was your Jewish upbringing like? Religion was not a big part of my family growing up. We would celebrate holidays and have something to celebrate. Never important to connect with religious meaning of the holiday and to be members of the religious community. As I've grown up in my life, Jamie and I have been creating our own home, and it's important for us to have a Jewish household and members of the Jewish community. Ryan Lavarle was an assimilated Jew, as assimilated as you can imagine. He happened to marry a Jewish woman named Jamie. She's also great. Okay. Look at these guys in the picture. This is Team Israel. Jason Marquis is the one with the blue hoodie on. Nick Rickles, father's Jewish, really nice guy. Never probably wore a kippah in his life, and so on. These guys, they didn't have to wear the kippah. They all wanted to during Hatikvah. They wanted to. They will tell you today, most of them, that wearing Israel across their chest was the most important thing they've ever done in their lives, in their baseball career. And what's slowly happening with examples like this is that when you give people the positive Judaism and not just talk about what happened yesteryear or what my generation did or Sandy Koufax did, you change the conversation. I've said this much to the chagrin of many. I'm a big traditionalist, big time. I'm one of the more traditional rabbis, and Bruce and Natalie could probably tell you that has graduated the seminary in the last 10 years. But I also recognize that change has to happen. And I don't mean changes like get rid of and go down to an hour service. I mean making that 3-hour service more meaningful for your congregants, whether you're in Reform, Conservative, or Orthodox. And just saying, well, why don't, and I always say this to any group I work with, to ask the Jews of this generation to just like and come to the programs that you want is not going to work. And I'll give you the best example I'll ever give, and close your ears if you don't want to hear the story because it's a little inappropriate, okay? The sisterhood, I told them, which was very controversial to mess with the sisterhood. He was very upset that the young women were not coming to their programming. So I said, you should start programming for them and stop asking them to come to the programming that you guys like. They came back to me and they said, what if we went pole dancing? And I said to them, no young woman wants to go pole dancing with Linda Eisenstadt. I'm just using Linda Eisenstadt. She's a wonderful woman. I'm using her because she has such a Jewish sounding name, right? It's our ritual director's wife. And she's wonderful. But the point is, how do we create experiences for young Jews, whether they're playing baseball or that feel a part of what we're doing without changing it? Yeah, you might lose a tune. You might even lose your seat. But you're going to be a part of a more vibrant Jewish community. And I agree. I believe that whether you're in Savannah, whether you're probably not if you're in Amsterdam, New York, because there's not too many people around there, as Bruce knows, but Savannah and Atlanta and New York and Chicago and Minnesota and beyond. And what I take from this is to understand that Israel is going to be strong, and we should all know that. America is going to regrow in tradition, and it's how we embrace those people who want to come on that journey with us. And the world's just not going to come around right now. And we need to provide experiences and moments in which they can, like Team Israel baseball or these trips, and being strong and holding down the fort, because hopefully one day they will. So that's a little bit of sport and modern society. Any thoughts? Yeah, David, go ahead.
Did Israel start a hockey team?
I don't know. So there's only one ice skating ring in Israel. And it's, I believe, in the north. I don't believe they have an international hockey team. They have a football team they're working on, because they do have flag football, and they have a professional football league now. Obviously, basketball, soccer, and sort of tennis and judo reign supreme. Those are their 5 sports. Baseball has a very small league. It's not very good, but they're working on it because they're really working on the youth. And softball also has been growing.
I think we had a movie, a Jewish film festival about a football team in Israel, if I remember.
Yeah, and Robert Kraft, the owner of the Patriots, takes a Hall of Fame trip there every year, which has been incredibly impactful. I mean, these trips and these missions to Israel with these major athletes or celebrities, that's just the nature. It goes viral. People get it. They answer questions, and they have an affinity for it. It's like Birthright.
I have a question having to do with women's sports. I know some of my Israeli friends, they play soccer. The women play soccer, but is there any funding for or taste for professional women's sports leagues other than tennis?
Yeah, so basketball for women is very big. There are WNBA players, specifically Alicia Clark, who's one of the best players in the WNBA, just won a championship with Seattle Storm. She's been over to play in Israel. We had one Israeli in the WNBA. I'll tell you what the hard part for a lot of these people in sports coming over, which we didn't talk about, there's two things. Number one is funding for the Olympics. Everyone has to be self-funding. Israel doesn't really fund the athletes, which is very hard. So that's why Team Israel baseball is raising a lot of money. And you can even imagine less if they don't have major league players. Israel softball almost qualified for the Olympics. They were one run away, women's softball, but basketball, softball, soccer. But remember, many of them, unless you are a giant in your sport, you have to serve the army. So in these very formidable years, at least 18 to 20, think even Gal Gadot served the army. So you have to get an exemption, and they will exempt a very small amount of athletes every year. I talked to a soccer player, Declan Kagan, who plays in America, and he was exempt, but it's very rare.
Isn't it good for the Israeli army to have Wonder Woman in it?
Yeah, well, it helped us, I'm sure. Although she might have been a little distracting with the lasso and being 6 foot and beautiful. That didn't probably help. Any other questions, thoughts?
Rabbi, I would say to you that I think that in your discussion, which was mostly about men and predominantly talking about Israel, but talking about sports and women, I think you probably haven't referred to the two most famous Jewish women in sports, certainly in this country, which would be Amy Alcott and Dara Torres.
I wouldn't certainly say that those are the two famous. I would say they're in the top 10, maybe not Amy Alcott. I don't know so much about Amy's story, and I don't know that it fits into this narrative so much. Dara Torres certainly does because of the Olympics. But the ones I would really look to are Shai Doron, who was drafted to the WNBA. She's Israeli, and went over to played at Maryland and won a national title there, and then drafted at WNBA, played for 1 year, and now is a star in Israel. I'd also, so I don't leave her story out. It's just not so telling because it's the same story really as Tal Brody. Played it here, then spent a little time playing here and went over back to Israel. And Tal is really the story. Jewish women in sports, certainly Allie Raisman. But again, I'm not sure her Judaism defines that, and wouldn't have been any different than Jason Markey, except that Jason Markey had this moment where he didn't play. If the Olympics were on Yom Kippur, I bet Allie Raisman wouldn't have played. Maybe she played on Tisha B'Av, but I don't think that's the same comparison. True. Sue Bird, as father's Jewish, she sort of doesn't. She's sort of like non-religious, but major name Nancy Lieberman Klein also. Sometimes I do a part of this at the end where I just list sort of these historic moments in Jewish sports, and there are plenty of women on that. I assure you.
Bruce Hyman is here.
Rabbi, wasn't there some athlete, and I'm not even sure if it was football or baseball, maybe last year, I think fasted during the day, but then played when Yom Kippur ended that evening, whichever it was his sport.
Yeah, so that does happen. Gabe Karimi noticeably did that at a very important game in Madison, Wisconsin. He then played for mostly the Chicago Bears, a little bit for the Atlanta Falcons. For those of you who are a Falcon player, played for 1 year. Gabe no longer is in the NFL, didn't have a great career, was plagued by injury. And also Ryan Lavarnway, I think I mentioned, took off Yom Kippur in the day and then played in the night game. The game probably started before the holiday ended, but it was probably relatively close. So yeah, the other thing, Carol, to note about Israeli women's sports is that men's sports are very poorly funded, and women's sports, as you can imagine, are even less well funded.
Is there any social stigma for women who play sports?
No, I'll tell you that what happens. So basketball is the highest generating revenue sports in Israel for tons of reasons. But unlike America, where you have TV deals and commercial deals and licensing deals and yada, 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 most NBA teams, the ticket sales are cherry on the top. They're not the big fundraising. In Israel, they make all of their money from ticket sales. So that's why unlike America, where we probably could adjust, we could adjust the wage gap. It'd be much harder in Israel because it's almost all ticket sales. So they almost didn't play this year in Israel basketball because they can't sell tickets. In the NBA played in a bubble, and WNBA played in a bubble because they still had ad revenues and they still had marketing deals and they could still sell sponsorships and all that kind of stuff. They don't have that kind of deals in Israel. The economy is not big enough and robust enough to warrant that. But no, there's no stigma of women playing basketball in Israel. Like I said, WNBA players. There was an Israeli, Naamah Shafir, who came over to play at Toledo, who was an Orthodox Jew. Some of you might remember from the late 90s, Tamir Goodman, who was an American Jew, but Orthodox. And so that's starting to happen a little bit.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you guys. And hopefully I'll make it out to Savannah. Will you guys have me?
Come visit anytime.
Would you like to see
very much.
Rabbi, would you like to see a little piece of historic Savannah?
Of course I would.
And I'll show you.
Okay.
We have 22 squares that comprise the historic district of about 2.5 miles in area. And we live on one of them. And I'll just show you what it looks like to have this beautiful front yard. I don't know if you'll be able to see how much you'll be able to see.
Yeah, there's no snow.
There's no snow.
I think it snowed twice in my lifetime.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Well, there are 22 of these little parks.
That's beautiful.
Here, there's a house that we live in a house built in 1855. The one next door that's being restored is 1868. So you have to come to Savannah and see what we have to offer.
I'm ready. All right. How far is there a Savannah airport?
Oh.
It's an international airport.
All right, I don't have to fly into it.
The Dark Ages?
Well, there could have been, I know you can get to Atlanta. How far is Atlanta to Savannah?
4 hours.
4 hours and 20 minutes.
Oh, then I'm definitely not flying into Atlanta. I'll just fly.
36-minute flight from Atlanta.
Except I'm a part-time resident. I can get you from one city to the other.
Okay. The only time I've probably been to, do Do you have to drive through to get to Miami from Chicago? I've done that drive a few times.
You don't have to, but you could.
You could,
All
but you don't have to.
I spend most of my free time, if I can, in Miami. My parents have a condo, which I told them, you know, once you're gone, that's mine. I don't need any money. I just want the condo. So
What part?
so we go down a lot. So, but usually we fly. We've only driven a couple times.
You also know we have the third oldest congregation in the country,
Oh,
founded in 1733. So you have to
is it
come see
Reform?
Yes.
Yeah. Reform.
I was just going to say, Sharon was a good segue into it. We just put, I go to Mikvah Israel, and website, video tour of the sanctuary and museum, which you can, if you're interested in the Jewish history of Savannah or Mikvah Israel, you know, anybody can access that, but particularly I was talking to the rabbi, but anybody can access that, and it's only been up for maybe a month, something like that.
All right, amazing. I'll try to check it out. Thank you so much for spending time with me, and it was so nice meeting all of you wonderful people. Jamie, thank you, and Bruce and Natalie, my love to you and the family. Okay.
Thank you so much. And for everybody else, we have Dr. Jennifer Thompson to speak next week on Jewish ethics and the climate emergency. So we will see you next Thursday, same place, same Zoom link. See you then.
Bye,
Thank
guys.
you, Jamie. Thank